My name's Travis. I'm not going to say my last name for obvious reasons, but I'm a real person, and this happened the way I'm about to tell it. At the time, I was 36, living outside a little town in northern Maine. I'd been doing whatever kept the lights on, logging for a few seasons, plowing, a little mechanic work. Then I landed at the local landfill because it was steadier. Not good money, but steady money. And that matters when you've got a wife and a kid, and you're trying to stay out of the hole. For legal reasons, I can't name the facility here. What I can say is that it is privately owned, not a cushy county job, which is going to matter later on. We all just called it the dump. It sits way out past the last real cluster of houses. If you've never been up here, everything's woods, trees, swamps, and old logging roads. The dump was big, not a little town transfer station. This one took trucks from a wide area, small towns, a couple bigger ones downstate, and commercial loads. There was a scale house up front, then a long gravel haul road that climbed to the active face. In daylight, it was ugly and loud. At night, it turned into a maze, little islands of light and activity separated by darkness and sour, dead air. I worked mostly nights. The shift was usually 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Nights paid a bit more, and honestly, I liked it. Less traffic, less bullshit, better supervisors. Days were mostly about handling incoming loads. Nights were more about organizing and pushing material around on site, plus all the maintenance and cleanup. We were all expected to become competent at everything eventually. Some nights I'd be in the wheel loader, moving thousands of tons of material. Other nights, I was out in the cold, fixing stuff or cleaning up. The site itself was laid out in zones. The main floodlights covered the active face and part of the haul road. The rest was pocket lighting, poles around the metal pilea, the brush pilea, and the area where they kept the roll-offs and some old containers. Past that, it was mostly dark. Management, if you want to call it that, was one site boss and a couple supervisors. Let's call the site boss Wade. Obviously not his real name. Wade was the kind of guy who acted like every question was a personal insult. Everything was figure it out, don't be a baby, I'm not paying you to think, that kind of thing. He kept the place running and always made sure everybody knew they were replaceable. And honestly, most of us were. A lot of guys on the crew were there because they couldn't work at the mill anymore, or their license was a mess, or they had stuff going on. Drinking, pills, anger issues, you name it. A few were solid, normal guys, but even they knew the score. You didn't rock the boat. In late summer going into fall, the dump started taking a lot more food waste. I don't mean the usual bagged kitchen trash. I mean real volume, expired grocery loads, restaurant scraps, and especially those big sealed bins that smelled like old grease and sour milk. The kind of smell that sticks in the back of your throat, and you taste it the next morning. I didn't know the paperwork details, but everyone heard the same story. New contract, more revenue. The owner wanted it. Someplace downstate wanted to offload their stuff, whatever. The why didn't matter to the guys on the ground. What mattered was that it changed the dump. Food waste attracts animals. In the mornings, the gulls would show up like a moving white cloud, screaming and fighting over scraps. At night, you'd get all the usual scavengers. Foxes, feral dogs, raccoons, things you mostly saw at the edge of the lights. The food waste quickly created issues. This stuff doesn't sit like construction debris. It rots. Bags get torn open. When the wind was right, you could stand in the scale house and smell it from almost a mile away. Some nights, the smell would roll out of the woods, and you'd swear the whole place was alive with it. To accommodate the stuff, they opened up an expansion cell out back, deeper in the woods. Instead of leaving the food load spread all over the main face, we'd push it down there into massive pits, compact it, and bury it. We had bears in northern Maine. Nobody pretends otherwise. You see bear prints on logging roads all the time. People hit bears with trucks. It's not even a story. But the dump hadn't been a bear hangout before, not the way it started to become. We were basically putting out an all-you-can-eat buffet on a schedule. Within a couple of weeks of the food waste ramping up, we started seeing signs around the edges. Here's where the real trouble began. Wade didn't want to hear the word bear at all. He never said it directly, but he got twitchy whenever anyone brought it up. He'd shut conversations down fast. "Don't start that," he'd say. Or, "We don't have a bear problem." The thing is, he didn't want to call anyone, didn't want official attention. If you called the wrong person, suddenly you've got inspections, new rules, and the whole operation becomes more expensive. The county doesn't pay extra for bear safety. They had chosen us because we were cheaper and easier to handle than their own guys. Wade didn't give a damn about animals or even people. He only cared about numbers. We all knew it. So we kept our heads down, told ourselves it was nothing worth calling in, and kept working. The real problem didn't start with a bear. Then something else entirely showed up. An animal nobody understood, but everybody started to whisper about. The first time I heard somebody say the word werewolf was on the radio. That's not a joke. One of the guys up on the face keyed up and said, "Hey man, your werewolf's back." And then he laughed and went back to arguing with a truck driver about where to dump. I hadn't seen anything myself. At that point, all I had were rumors. A few bags ripped open and weird footprints in a spot we'd just cleaned up. More tracks on the haul road that weren't from any animal we knew. Some people even said they saw a naked, hairy man prowling around the food waste pits at night. The stories weren't consistent. Somebody else saw a big dog nosing around the break room, standing up like a man for a second, then dropping back down. The new guys called everything a bear. The older guys said, "Bears don't move like that," but they didn't push it. The word werewolf came up because nobody knew what else to call it, and because it was funny. You're out there at 2 in the morning, up to your hips in trash, rot, and bad air, and a joke is a joke. Tell the werewolf to wear PPE, that kind of thing. But underneath the jokes, the vibe changed. Some of the more experienced guys stopped walking around the dark edges if they could help it. People kept cab doors locked and windows rolled up. You started to notice how much of the site was outside the reach of the main lights, especially the food waste section. That was almost a mile away from the site entrance. Those pits became the hot spot for rumors and alleged sightings. If somebody said they'd seen eyes in the dark or saw something moving behind their machines, it was always down there by the pits. A couple of guys went on day shift, said nights were too hard on the body. A few even quit. Nobody said they were scared of the werewolf or whatever you want to call it, but everybody knew they didn't want to be out in the dark anymore. Nobody was screaming or refusing to work. It was just this low, steady tension. Wade didn't mind the werewolf talk. The rumors were helpful for him. As long as guys were using that word, he could shrug off every bear sighting as bullshit from night shift weirdos instead of having to say bear out loud and make it a real problem. And of course, he didn't do anything regarding our concerns. Nobody argued, despite everything people claimed they had seen out in the dark. You didn't argue with Wade if you wanted to keep your job. Then a kid named Jordan lost his shit one night. Jordan was new, early 20s, skinny, came in late fall when the weather was already going bad. He said he'd done some earth-moving work. Honestly, he looked more like a guy who should be stocking shelves than running a loader, but we'd all been new at some point. He was on nights with us for maybe 3 weeks before it happened. Jordan was working on the loader down on the backside of the open food trench that had just been filled up, near the perimeter fence that separated the dump from the tree line, tidying up the edges of the pit. There were no light towers in that immediate area, as the rest of us had moved on to a new pit, about 300 yards west. When he came up to the break room, everybody knew something was wrong. He'd pissed himself. You could see it down the front of his coveralls, and he didn't even seem to notice. His face was sweaty and red from crying, and he was breathing hard like he'd just run a mile. He slammed the door, locked it immediately, and backed away from it like he expected something to hit it any second. We all just stared, completely stunned. At first, he wouldn't look straight at any of us. He just kept crying, rubbing his leg through his coveralls and staring at the floor, shoulders shaking. Then one of the guys noticed a dark patch blooming just below his left knee. It looked like blood. That was when the room shifted. Jokes died off. We all got up and crowded in around him, hands up like we were dealing with a skittish dog, telling him to breathe, to slow down. Finally, one of the older guys asked him what happened, and it all came out in pieces. He said he'd stepped off the loader to take a piss near the back of the pit, at the fence. No light tower back there, just the headlights of the machine about 100 feet behind him. While he was standing there, he heard something moving in the brush. He looked up. At first, he saw nothing, but then he saw two tiny little orbs between branches, about 6 or 7 feet off the ground. He kept staring, trying to figure out what he was looking at. Then something huge shifted in the dark. He said a shape broke loose from the trees and came straight at him on 2 legs, closing the gap in seconds. When he tried to explain it, he kept coming back to the same line. It walked like a man. He almost whispered it, jaw clenched, like he hated putting it that way, but couldn't find any other words. Then he turned and ran for the ladder on the side of the cab. Said he almost made it clean, but it grabbed him around the calf and tried to pull him back down. Felt claws scrape across his shin while he hauled himself up. He kicked at it until it let go, then scrambled up and slammed the door. By the time he had turned around to look at the thing, it was already back at the fence, clearing it in one leap. Then he spun the loader around and floored it back to the break room. He began to describe the head, and that was where he really started to struggle. He kept saying it didn't look like a person at all, but it didn't look like a bear either. It had a muzzle, he said, but not like a dog. The mouth was wide and open on one side. The teeth, every time we asked him to slow down and describe it, he'd start to shake and lose his place. The whole damn thing just looked wrong. Too long here, too thick there. He motioned at his own face without really touching it. The nose was like pushed out, but not round like a bear, and the jaw sat crooked, like it didn't fit right. One of the teeth was sticking out weird on the side. One of the older guys, a quiet dude who'd been with the dump longer than any of us, suddenly went pale. "Hold up," he said. "That tooth, you mean the one in the lower jaw, over on the left side? Kinda looks like it's growing sideways out of the gum." The room went dead still. Everybody turned and looked at him. Jordan just stared at him for a second, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Left side, sticking out upwards and off to the side. I saw it before I turned around and ran." That was the moment the bottom dropped out of the room. Up until then, it had been a crazy story. One that would certainly have become another werewolf joke, but nobody laughed. Guys shifted in their seats, looked at the floor, checked the windows without meaning to. Whatever was out there wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was something real that at least 2 people had seen up close. No one really cared about the new guy, but the older one, Gary, was a different story. Everyone knew him. Half the guys had been trained by him. He wasn't the type to make shit up. "Don't tell Wade," one of the guys said. "Go straight to the council. Let them deal with it." But Jordan didn't listen. That stupid boy went straight into Wade's office when he came in that morning. I don't know exactly how that conversation went because I wasn't there, but I heard enough from the admin girl afterwards. She had a thing for me and never missed a chance to start a conversation. Apparently, the kid tried to get money out of Wade, said he'd been attacked by something big near the back trenches, and showed him the cut on his leg, said he wanted compensation. Otherwise, he'd sue and get the county and OSHA involved. Wade just laughed in his face, said the cut probably came from the loader, that he'd climbed down too fast and lost his footing, told him if he'd followed safe work practices, he wouldn't be hurt, and that if he was seeing monsters in the dark, he was probably under the influence. Wade wasn't stupid. He always found a way to wind himself out of trouble, and he knew exactly how to handle that kid. Company policy was that they could do a drug test anytime they wanted. Most of us had that hanging over our heads for one reason or another. They sent Jordan straight to a clinic in town. The next evening, word had gotten back to the rest of us. He'd pissed hot for something. Might have been weed, might have been something stronger. And just like that, the kid was gone. Fired for cause. No incident report, no lawsuit, no inspections. Everybody heard what had happened to Jordan, one way or another. The message was simple. Shut up, do your job, and don't talk about monsters in the woods. By then, most of us on night shift, me included, were pretty sure there was something strange out in those woods. But we just kept going. Nobody walked. We all needed the paycheck more than we needed answers. My own encounter with this werewolf happened on a Tuesday night in late November. Wade had been writing us about cleaning things up before Thanksgiving. Most of the guys on night shift are on loaders, dozers, and dump trucks, moving trash from the face down to the pits. But you always need men on the ground to measure fill levels, direct trucks, and remove contaminations the machines couldn't reach. That night, we were short a man because one of the new guys, who normally did that sort of work, hadn't shown up. That meant one of the operators had to fill in. I drew the short straw that night. The pit we had been filling was a rectangular cut at the far end of the expansion. Beyond the back fence, the woods came right up to it. The pit was about half full. Trucks had been backing in and dumping from 3 sides for a few days, and the dozer and loader we used to compact and stack. The stuff had started working it, but had been called to another pit, which was about to be covered. So this one was a complete mess. There were loose windrows and smaller piles along the walls, a mix of food waste and shredded packaging. The air down there was thick with it. Dairy, meat, old produce, all trapped in the pit. I was supposed to be down there on foot, removing loose bags and plastic from the ramp and dragging out any obvious contaminations that didn't belong in a pit, like large pieces of metal or plastic drums. That part of the job was absolutely disgusting, so I tried to waste as much time as I could while everyone else was busy. I hung around the fence line at the back of the pit, checking it for sagging, breaches, that sort of thing, something I could easily justify in case someone asked questions later. The floodlights didn't reach that far. We had one light tower out there that threw a weak yellow cone over the ramp at the front of the pit. The rest of the light towers were tied up at the other pit that was being worked. After about 20 minutes of walking that line, stopping to kick at the bottom wire here, tug on a post there, trying to look busy more than actually fixing anything, I started to feel it. That itch between your shoulder blades you get when you're sure somebody's watching you, even if you can't see them. At first, I tried to shrug it off. I told myself it was just the stories, that I was letting Jordan get into my head. But my body didn't care what I told it. The hair on my arms went up under my jacket. I noticed I was starting to check my surroundings more often, just couldn't help it. Every now and then, I stopped and pointed my flashlight into the trees. You don't see much when you do that. The beam just hits the first row of trunks and dies. It was more of a reassurance thing. But then, as I swept left to right, I caught a flash of something between the first and second row. Not eyeshine, just a darker shape slipping from one tree to another, low and fast. I froze. For a good 10 seconds, I didn't move. I just listened. All I could hear was the distant hum of machines and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. You're jumping at shadows, I told myself. I took another couple of steps and decided it was time to do some actual work, down in the pit. So I turned around and started walking away from the fence. That's when I heard a thud somewhere behind me. I turned around, flashlight in my hand, and there it was. It had cleared the fence effortlessly. I hadn't seen it happen, but there was no mistaking where it had come from. The mesh behind it was still trembling, one of the posts leaning at a new angle. The thing stood on our side now, up on 2 legs, balanced like it had been doing that its whole life. It was taller than any man I knew, thick through the shoulders and chest, arms hanging too low with long hands that curled and opened again like they were itching to tear into something. For a few seconds, it didn't move toward me at all. It just watched me, head tilted a little to one side, then to the other, like a dog trying to puzzle out a sound it doesn't recognize. The sideways tooth in its jaw caught the light every time it moved its head, a small, bright chip in a face that didn't look like a person or a bear or anything I could put a name to. The head was wrong, just like Jordan had described it, stretched forward, but nowhere near as long or clean as that of a dog. The snout looked more like that of a pig than that of a canine. I don't know how to describe it properly. There was a distinct muzzle, yes, but it looked crooked and stretched unevenly. But the thing definitely had canine teeth, big ones, those jutting out of its upper jaw. I'd say they were at least 2 inches long, if not 3. Its eyes caught my beam and flashed pale, not glowing like in movies, just reflecting like any animal, but set too deep below its huge eyebrows. The upper half of its face and head almost made it look like a Neanderthal. I'd been to the museum in New York with my son just a few weeks earlier when we visited family down there. That's what it reminded me of. But the whole thing just didn't fit together properly. The word werewolf fit it just fine, as stupid as it sounds. I was so busy trying to understand what I was looking at that I didn't realize how much danger I was in at that moment. Then it dropped down to all 4s and started moving toward me. It covered ground fast, but it didn't look right doing it. Its head stayed too high, the shoulders rolling, the hands hitting the bare soil with only the knuckles, like they were built to grab, not to run. For a second, I just stood there and watched it approach, my brain locked up. Then something in me finally snapped loose and I ran. There was nowhere to go. The break room was almost 400 yards away, with several pits in between. There was no way I was going to outrun that thing over such a distance. My only option was the pit right next to me. On a hunch more than anything else, I headed straight for it. If there was any place where I could maybe hide or lose it somehow, it was down there, between piles of trash, rotten food, and that choking stink. Maybe it would get distracted by something. Maybe I could find something to fight it with. I cut sideways and made for the edge. I half ran, half skidded down one of the piles right on the side of the pit. I hit the bottom hard, knees bending, and kept going, weaving between the windrows. I didn't take the time to look back, but I could hear it coming down into the trench behind me, probably sliding down the exact same pile. I rounded the next pile and dropped out of its line of sight for a second. On the far side, there was a low space where some of the trash had slumped, a pocket of cardboard, loose plastic bags, and busted produce boxes stacked waist-high, then rose up again into another pile. I didn't think about it. I dove into the gap, shoved myself in as low as I could go, and started pulling bags and flattened boxes down over myself. It wasn't a good hiding place. I knew that even while I was doing it. The stuff was cold and wet and stank like hell. But within a few seconds, I had a layer of plastic and cardboard over my head. I forced myself to stay still, no adjusting, trembling, just breathing as quietly as I could, and trying not to gag. A few seconds later, it came close. I couldn't see it directly, but I could hear it. The steps got closer, then slowed. I heard trash shifting, bags popping, something heavy sifting through the loose pile. It was moving back and forth in the lane just beyond my heap, changing direction in short, irritated bursts, like it knew I was close but couldn't quite nail it down. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse through a tear in the plastic right in front of my face, a flash of fur, a clawed hand, one of those long arms lifting up a bag. It kept lifting its nose and sucking air, trying to sniff me out. Down in that pit, though, the smell was brutal. Rot, grease, sour milk, meat that had been out in the open for days, and there was the constant low rumble of engines from across the clearing and the occasional backup beeper drifting over the berms. Between the stink and the noise, whatever that thing was couldn't quite lock onto me. It paced around for what felt like forever, circling, stopping, starting again. I didn't move. I didn't cough. I just pressed my face into my sleeve and hoped like hell it would give up. Eventually, the sounds shifted. The footsteps moved a few yards away, and I heard bags tearing and trash sliding. Through a thin gap, I saw it drop its nose into a pile a little farther down. Back turned to me, front half buried as it started sifting through the waste. I eased one hand out from under the bags, feeling around until my fingers closed on something solid and small enough to grab, a half-rotten pear. I looked again, making sure the thing was still distracted, then tossed it as far as I dared off to my left, aiming for another pile of plastic bags. The second it hit, the thing reacted. It whipped its head toward the sound and went at it in an instant, scrambling through the pit on all fours. I heard it slam into the heap I'd hit with the pear, bags popping, plastic crackling, like a big dog diving full-on into a garbage can. While it was busy tearing into that pile, I moved. I slid the bags and cardboard off my back as quietly as I could, inch by inch, then slid out of the pocket I had been hiding in. I stayed low and picked my steps, only putting my boots down on bare soil instead of loose trash. There was a long windrow of trash running almost the full length of the pit, almost like a wall, but only about 5 feet high. I put that between me and the creature, staying low as I worked my way along the far side of the windrow. I could still hear it, sifting and snorting and shoving things aside, but the noises didn't come any closer. I was able to follow that row as far as it would take me without being noticed, but the base of the ramp was on the other side of it, the side the werewolf was on. There was no way for me to reach the ramp without stepping into direct line of sight of that thing. I had to cover about 30 feet of flat, open ground, then another 60 or so up the ramp. I would be exposed the whole time. I stopped at the corner and listened. The sounds of trash being moved and ripped open were still there, but they were far away. I risked a quick look around the windrow. It had moved away from the pile at the edge of the pit and toward the far end of the windrow I had been hiding behind, still shoulder deep in the trash and throwing stuff out behind it. It was doing exactly what I'd hoped it would do. It had forgotten about me and was completely focused on the rotten food that was buried everywhere around the pit. I stepped out, crossed over, and started up the ramp, walking at first, then moving a little faster, trying not to break into a full run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to sprint, but I knew if I started pounding my feet, it would hear me. I made it almost to the top before it noticed. There was a rip of sound from behind me, trash scattering, and an audible growl. I looked back over my shoulder and saw it standing still, holding a pack of something, head up, eyes locked on me. Then it forgot the trash and came for me. It dropped to all fours again and started that weird gallop, shoulders rolling, head whipping up and down, knuckles pounding the ground. It was fast, but not as fast as I'd built it up to be in my head. For a second, I thought I might actually beat it out of the pit. I stopped thinking about hiding and ran flat out toward the break room. It was far, and I had to run around a few pits, but this time I had a head start, and it was my only play. As I was getting close, I had a choice to make. The break room was closer, maybe 30 yards in front of me, a converted office box with thin fiberglass walls and a cheap door. There was a radio inside and a phone, and for a split second, my brain went straight to that. Dive in, lock the door, call for help. But even while I was thinking it, I knew it wouldn't hold. That door was a joke. If the thing behind me decided to hit it a few times, it would break. Out past it, on the far side, sat one of the company pickups, parked nose out toward the Hall Road. Beacon off, engine cold, but I knew the keys would be in it. They always were during the week since work ran 24/7. If I went into the break room, I'd be trapped. If I made it to the truck, I had at least a chance to make it out. I changed course and aimed past the break room instead, cutting across the gravel toward the pickup. The thing was still behind me, maybe 20 yards back now, close enough that I could hear the pattern of its steps over my own breathing. I didn't look over my shoulder again. I just focused on the truck. I hit the door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside hard enough to bang my knee on the steering column. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys, but I managed to turn the ignition. Just as the engine fired up, the front end of the truck dropped. The creature had thrown itself onto the hood in one jump. The whole truck sagged. It immediately threw its misshapen head against the windscreen. The windshield cracked and bowed inward, but didn't break completely. These things are designed that way, but it wouldn't withstand another hit like that. I threw the truck into reverse and stomped the pedal. The rear wheels spun for a second on the gravel and then bit. The truck lurched backward, and I saw the werewolf slide off the hood. Panicked as I was, I kept going backwards until the back of the truck slammed into the fence. For a heartbeat, I just sat there, staring out through the warped glass. I could make out the dark shape thrashing on the ground in front of the truck, already pushing itself up again. Some part of me wanted to throw it in drive and head straight for the Hall Road, get as far away from it as I could. But there was another part that told me to finish that thing right then and there, that something like that had no right to exist, and that eventually, someone would die in its claws if it hadn't happened already. I nudged the wheel to the right, hit drive and floored it. The werewolf didn't have time to jump out of the way. I caught it with the front right corner of the truck. The impact was like hitting a stump buried under snow. I heard a massive bang, and the hood bent upward on that side. Then, I felt something give under the tire as the F-250 made its way over the thrashing body. I kept going for a few more yards, then made a hard left and pointed the nose of the truck toward the Hall Road. As I swung around, I glanced out the window to my left. It looked bad. One of its legs was clearly broken in multiple places, and the other one looked bent too. But then again, it looked weird even before I hit it. Its hip looked crushed too, and there were bloody marks all over its torso and shoulders. But those long arms were still flailing, and its head hadn't been crushed either. The thing was lying on its side, and had already started dragging itself toward the gap I'd just punched in the fence with both arms. It knew exactly where it needed to go. The brush came right up to the fence there. Before I could even think about turning around for a second pass, it had almost covered half the distance between where I had hit it and the gap in the fence. So, I kept going down the hall road, headed straight for the supervisor's office up by the main entrance. Wade wasn't on site at night. Nights were run by one of the supervisors, Mike, a guy in his 50s who'd been in trucking and construction his whole life. He wasn't soft, but he was fair. If you did your work and didn't make his life harder, he treated you decently. He took one look at the front of the truck, and his face changed. He didn't yell. He just swore under his breath and told me to get inside. I was still shaking when I sat down. My clothes stank. My hands wouldn't stay still. Mike closed the door, looked at me for a second and said, "Tell me what happened." After what had happened to Jordan, I wasn't stupid enough to say werewolf. I didn't even say something that walked like a man. I gave him the cleanest version I could think of. I told him I'd been out at the food pits doing fence checks and cleanup when a black bear showed up. I told him it chased me into the pit and up the ramp. I told him I ran for the truck, got it started just as it jumped on the hood, then panicked and backed into the fence and hit something in front of me trying to get away. "Bear," he repeated, watching me. "You're sure?" "That's what I saw," I said. I kept it there. He let out a long breath and rubbed his face. "All right," he said. "Here's the problem. If I write this up like you're saying, we've got a wildlife incident. That means reports, calls, and people coming out here. Wade's going to lose his mind." He wasn't threatening me. He was just laying it out. We went back out with flashlights. The truck looked even worse from the front. Hood messed up, grill broken, fluids leaking everywhere. The fence behind where it was parked looked just as bad. On the ground where I'd clipped the thing, there was a churned-up patch of gravel and trash, plus a few dark smears already soaking in. You could see where something big had dragged itself over a patch of gravel, but that could have been there before. Beyond that, there was compact, dry soil. No tracks. Wade rolled in just after 6. The busted truck sat off to the side by the shop. Mike called me into the office when Wade got there. Didn't even sit down. Just stood off to the side with his arms crossed while Wade read the notes Mike had made during the night. Wade didn't say anything for a full minute. He just stared at the screen, then out the window at the truck, then back at the paper I'd signed. "Let me get this straight," he said finally. "You see a black bear. It ignores an entire pit full of rotten food and chases you instead. You run over to the truck. You don't lock the doors and wait for it to lose interest. Instead, you back into a fence and take it down. Then you drive forward, hit the bear hard enough to completely F up the truck, but not hard enough for it to die?" I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. I knew exactly how this was going to go. I glanced at Mike. He kept his face blank. Wade leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long time. "Here's the problem, Travis," he said. "I can't have operators out here who lose their shit and damage company equipment because they got spooked by shadows. I definitely can't have operators making up stories that bring the county or OSHA down on us. Whether there was a bear or not, I don't care. What I care about is liability, and right now, you're it. I'm booking this as reckless operation of a vehicle. You're done here. Go turn in your gear, then go home. I'll have your final check mailed. I'm still unemployed to this day. I still talk to a couple of the guys. From what they've told me, whatever I hit that night either died out in those woods or decided it was time to move on. I have no idea if what I hit that night was an actual werewolf. I'm just a machinery operator, no damn scientist. But whatever it was, it came damn close to killing me that night.